Welcome back, everybody. In today's video, we're going to be taking a look at running backs in redraft leagues. We're going to take a look at their points per game, first of all, compare it to their strength of schedule throughout the first 10 weeks so far, then take a look at running back strength of schedule from weeks 15 to 17, the fantasy playoffs, to see who might be a good buy, hold, sell high potentially, and a couple of other different verdicts at the end of this once we take a look at all of this data put together. But I do think this is an interesting video, and I do think that you could potentially make some really intelligent moves and be able to win your fantasy leagues because of the moves that you might be able to make, pivoting from one of these running backs to another when it's going to give you an advantage when it matters the most in the fantasy playoffs. And so we take a look first at running backs, and it's sorted by weeks 1 through 10 points per game. I also have their strength of schedule directly to the right of that. And so we see that, obviously, to nobody's surprise, Jonathan Taylor is the RB1, even in a full point PPR. It's probably worse in a standard, to be honest with you. I haven't checked that, though. Now, he's done this with an advantageous schedule, but obviously I would argue that most weeks Jonathan Taylor is still going to be an incredible start for you and probably a top 5 option almost regardless as to the potential game script or the difficulty of the run defense he's playing against. But then we have players like Christian McCaffrey who have done, pretty close. It's still a good, 2.5 points per game difference, but he's done that despite having a pretty difficult strength of schedule overall. Obviously, having about 6 catches for 50 yards and a touchdown every couple of games through the air, let alone what he's doing on the ground, definitely helps give him a high floor and ceiling. But we have players like, in the relatively elite tier with Achane, Gibbs, and Bijan, who have done so with, a relatively neutral strength of schedule. Then we have Josh Jacobs, who's done so with a slightly favorable, so on and so forth. Bucky Irving is somebody who was playing well despite having a pretty difficult strength of schedule. But I want to make note of a couple players who have done very well with an above average schedule in terms of favorable for them. DeAndre Swift has had an incredibly easy strength of schedule so far. So that is something to note. Obviously, with the emergence of Kyle Monangai potentially taking away some carries and receptions, mostly carries though, in kind of a Gibbs and Montgomery light situation there. That's something to note for the future. Breece Hall, who's a little bit lower on the list, he has had a significantly favorable strength of schedule, which you might not have seen on the actual field, given how terrible the passing game is and how hard it is for him to do anything. Although he's had some big games, to be fair, and he's very talented. Somebody who has benefited massively from an easy strength of schedule, if you look a little bit down, is J.K. Dobbins. He has had the easiest strength of schedule in the entire NFL so far. And I gathered this information from Draft Sharks. If you'd like to go there, you can edit it to, any week you want to look at some splits. I just took a look at weeks 1 through 10 because obviously that's all we've gone through so far throughout the season. RJ Harvey kind of fits in that category as well, even though he's kind of a complimentary back at this point in time. I do want to mention that there is potential news of J.K. Dobbins going to the IR. If that were to happen, I do think that RJ Harvey could be a sneaky buy right now if the owner doesn't understand that this could potentially happen. There could be a lot of upside with that. And then somebody who has had a relatively moderate strength of schedule but hasn't really been performing is Ja'Cory Crosky-Merritt. That's been pretty disappointing. I want to give Trey Benson a break here because, when he was actually active for the most part, he was in a timeshare with James Conner. James Conner was still the lead back. And into his first game, he was finally allowed to be the lead back, and he unfortunately got hurt there too. So if you own the Cardinals backfield, that was pretty disappointing. But what is pretty disconcerting, to be honest, is Kareem Hunt and Isaiah Pacheco being way down at the bottom here, despite having, a relatively easy strength of schedule, definitely above average compared to the list. So take this for what you will, and we're going to take a look at weeks 15 through 17, specifically the strength of schedule for these running backs. And now we take a look at weeks 15 through 17, the actual fantasy playoffs, and the strength of schedule difference for some of these running backs. At the top, Ja'Cory Crosky-Merritt is in a tier of his own in terms of how easy his schedule is. I know he's been disappointing. I know we've been seeing some Rodriguez as well, but I still think that on a per-touch basis, he's been pretty solid. it's been disappointing that, he didn't really have the breakout that we had hoped for, but you could potentially just leave him on the bench. He might be available depending on your league size, how serious your league is. So, I'm just saying there's a chance if you are dealing with injuries that he could be somebody you could plug into your lineup and get some upside any given week. We also see that kind of in a tier somewhat of, 12 to, I'll do it probably 15 to 17% in terms of the schedule difference. You have Chase Brown, Chan, Aaron Jones, and Jordan Mason go hand in hand. Hunt and Pacheco go hand in hand, as do Stevenson and Henderson. Josh Jacobs has a significantly easy strength of schedule. Christian McCaffrey, watch out, because he's been doing what he's been doing with a difficult strength of schedule, and now it gets quite easy for him. Trey Benson also has a very easy strength of schedule. I think he could potentially be a good buy. Then you also have, Judkins, Genti, and Kamara around that 9.5 to 11% range. Also, some players to watch out for: Amari and Hampton and Vidal. With Hampton, he's potentially going to come back after the bye, so that's interesting. And Saquon Barkley even has a relatively easy strength of schedule. In terms of players who have, somewhat advantageous strength of schedule, but not nearly as good as some of the running backs I previously mentioned, we have Bucky Irving and Rashad White as a tandem. Woody Marks is interesting, and Derrick Henry as well. His strength of schedule previously was much more difficult. Now, players who have a somewhat rough strength of schedule, but nothing terribly brutal. You have ETN, Pollard, Spears, and Dowdle and Chuba go together. Jonathan Taylor's schedule gets significantly harder, as does Javonte Williams. Then kind of getting into the tier of it's pretty difficult and not easy by any means, but there is worse. We have Brees, Bijan, Gibbs, and Montgomery are a tandem. Kyron Williams, Jalen Warren. But once we get to the bottom of the list here, this schedule, or the schedule for every one of these players, is absolutely brutal. And so in that tier, we're talking about James Cook, Kenneth Walker, and Charbonnet as a tandem, Dobbins and Harvey as a tandem, Swift and Monungai as a tandem as well. I would strongly think that you could sell Swift for a decent price. I think you could potentially get something really good for James Cook as well. But this is how the strength of schedule is going to work out for these running backs in weeks 15 through 17. So that's going to be something you want to pay attention to here. And I want to give a special shout out to my Patreon members. Thank you to Big Hunt, SP, Mage Jack, Infamy MTG, AOYOB, and The Dawn. Without your support, this would not be possible. As you're probably well aware if you've been watching my videos for a while, I cannot get monetized because of the film breakdowns I do, and even just the little videos I have where I have clips of plays in them. They get demonetized every single time, making it, therefore, impossible to collect any revenue. So, obviously, your support is greatly appreciated. And if you are so inclined to become a member, the perks would be you will get access to a private Discord where we have both a real life and fantasy football chat, as well as a voice chat if you just don't want to have to type a bunch of stuff. I'll also give you detailed roster breakdowns and roster reviews where we talk about the strengths and weaknesses of your team. Then we kind of break it down further by looking into the scoring settings themselves and the starting lineup requirements to help you build the best team to help you dominate for years to come. In both Dynasty and then in Redraft, obviously, I'd help you with a good, solid game plan, especially if you know where you're drafting from. Then also give you detailed trade advice based on your specific league settings to help you dominate. Also give you access to private live streams and the ability to not only see videos at least one day early, but also the ability to suggest videos that you would like to be created. So if you would like to support the channel, I would really appreciate it. If not, just please like and subscribe. Let's get back to the video. And finally, I have everything laid out here, along with a verdict, at least in my opinion, for each one of these players. Now, I understand that you know your own league significantly more than I ever could. You know whether your league trades at all, whether there's constant trading going on, right? Whether specific managers might be difficult, whether they've checked out, and whether or not you can really complete some of these trades. These are just suggestions on my end if you're able to get them done. And you may disagree, and that's fine, but I'm going to give you some reasoning for most of these guys, right? So with Jonathan Taylor, he's definitely going to see a more difficult strength of schedule, but I think he's relatively matchup proof. The only thing that could go wrong is if the Colts are immediately losing a game significantly, but with the addition of Sauce Gardner to help shore up their defensive back core, along with the return of one of their cornerbacks who's pretty solid, I forget his name, I think that's a little bit less likely to be happening. So I do think that if the owner would even consider selling him, that he is a buy. But I think that Christian McCaffrey and Devon Achane are serious buys. I think that if you can trade somebody that's relatively close to them, like a Gibbs or a Bijan, who I think are sell high or holds, if you can get a player of a similar caliber that has an easier strength of schedule. So understand that too. I'm not saying to sell for some scrub wide receiver 3, right? No kidding. But I think if you could complete kind of a lateral trade along those lines to somebody that has a more advantageous matchup in the fantasy playoffs or multiple, that could be advantageous to you. I think Bucky Irving is a serious buy. The owner might be disappointed with the lack of production. There is the chance that he might not return till a little bit later. His status is a little bit unclear, but I do think that he's a serious buy, especially if we get some positive news about him. Somebody like I think James Cook is potentially, a sell high or a hold. You may not be able to get somebody that's better than him. I think that Javonte Williams is a hold as well. Some more players I think are serious buys are Saquon Barkley and Omarion Hampton. The sledding is about to get significantly easier for them. And with Hampton, it's not necessarily, I guess, that it's significantly easier, but he's one of those guys that the owner might have forgotten about him. And if you can get him for relatively cheap, I think that would be a smart move for the fantasy playoffs. I think Rico Dowdle, he has a little bit more of a difficult strength of schedule, but I do think that he's a hold because he's been playing incredibly well despite being on a pretty bad team. Ashton Genty has a significantly easier strength of schedule in the fantasy playoffs. I think he is a serious buy. Another player that I think is a sell high if you can is Breece Hall because it gets significantly more difficult for him and there's no help in the passing game. So, and I understand that Garrett Wilson is going to be out for a couple weeks, potentially 3 to 4. They may just end up shutting him down. And while that would help feature him more in the offense, theoretically, it's also going to make it really difficult for him to do anything. A couple more players. I think Quinshon Judkins is a serious buy. He went from having a slightly difficult strength of schedule to having a supremely easy strength of schedule. I think that Chase Brown is one of the best buys in redraft leagues because he had one of the most difficult initial strength of schedules, and he has one of the easiest playoff strength of schedules as well. Some more players that are interesting. So RJ Harvey, I have him as a sell high or hold. So there's a couple ways to think about this, in my opinion. There is the potential news of J.K. Dobbins going on IR. So while he would see more work, if you could sell the hype and get a running back that has an easier strength of schedule because his is going to be the worst in the league during the fantasy playoffs, I think that's interesting for you. But also at the same time, if you can't get anything, he might end up just getting a bunch more work, and then you could plug him in as a flex RB2 type potentially. And even if it is a difficult strength of schedule, if you can't get anything better, I do think that he could significantly rise in his points per game, right? A couple other players, I think Woody Marks is a buy. He's going to have gone from a 1.4% up to a 3.9%. So that's a slightly better strength of schedule for his sake and favors him. And he's starting to take over the backfield more. I think that Travion Henderson and Ramondre Stevenson could be good buys because the team's good. They're scoring a decent amount of points, and the sledding should get significantly easier for them. And I think that Trey Benson is one of the best buys in redraft leagues as well. I think he's super talented. Even in a limited sample size, we saw explosive run after explosive run. If you look at his yards per carry, basically every game of his entire career, with the exception of like 1 or 2, he's had a very good to elite yards per carry. If he gets more volume and continues the work in the passing game that we saw at the beginning of the season, I think he could be a serious threat to win fantasy championships. And then finally, I think that Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt is also a good buy because I think you could potentially get him off waivers. I think you could get him for really, really cheap and as a minor throw-in. And then, there's the upside that he ends up performing for you. You may not be able to trust him, but, at the same time, injuries could strike, or somebody that you just don't feel comfortable starting might have a brutal matchup as well. And so I think that could potentially help you out. But where do you agree? Where do you disagree? Let me know below in the comment section. And with that being said, if you would be so kind, I would really appreciate it if you could subscribe to the Patreon. I'm trying to do this full time now. So your support would be greatly appreciated, obviously. And if you do not wish to or cannot, if you could just, leave a comment below, subscribe to the channel, that absolutely helps in the algorithm. So yeah, I hope you guys made it so far, performing relatively well. I hope you make it to the fantasy playoffs, make it to the championship, crush it in the championship. And I think that some of these guys and trading for some of these guys that I mentioned as either buys or, serious buys, I really hope that if you're able to get that done, that it helps you out. And, I hope you obviously win all your championships. But yeah, once again, just like, subscribe, comment below. With that being said, I'll see you in the next video. Thanks.